Political Actor here, continuing with our review of the three branches of government. We now come to the executive branch, where laws are executed, where most of our everyday interactions with government actually happen. Both the US and the UK have massive governmental bureaucracies, but when it comes to the question of who leads the executive branch within each country, the US and the UK have very different answers. In the UK, nominally speaking, ultimate authority rests with the Crown, the country's head of state. But as a constitutional monarchy, that authority is invested in the Leader of Parliament, the Prime Minister, who formally advises the Crown and, in fact, exercises power, while the monarch is careful to never obstruct the government or the will of the people expressed in Parliament. Thus, the UK's executive branch melds with the legislative branch, as the monarch formally commands the Prime Minister to form a government at the beginning of every new parliamentary session. Although there are permanently employed workers within the UK's government ministries, career civil servants follow the policy of the 22 senior ministers that make up the UK cabinet. These ministers are, like the Prime Minister, also members of Parliament, and although they are, formally speaking, appointed by the monarch, they are selected on the advice of the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister must also appoint an additional 97 other ministers in order to form their government. It must be emphasized that all of these executive ministers are also legislators as members of Parliament. But in the US, while government policy is influenced by the legislators in Congress, government is run by the entirely separate executive branch, as the US does not permit anyone to work in more than one branch of government at a time, especially the chief executive, the President of the United States, who also serves as head of state, the Commander-in-Chief of the US Armed Forces, the country's chief diplomat, and official leader of their political party. None of this authority is symbolic. The President, backed up by the Vice President, sits atop a complex hierarchy consisting of dozens of government agencies. Many of those agencies have heads that answer directly to the President, while many of the other agencies fall under the purview of one of the 15 executive departments. These are the Departments of Agriculture, Commerce, Defense, Education, Energy, Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, Housing and Urban Development, the Interior, Justice, Labor, State, Transportation, the Treasury, and Veterans Affairs. The head of each of these departments is known as the Secretary of that department, with the exception of the Department of Justice, whose head is known as the Attorney General. These 15 secretaries make up part of the United States Cabinet. The rest of the cabinet will also generally include the Vice President and the President's Chief of Staff, as well as a select few other prominent officials like the Director of National Intelligence and the U.S. Ambassador to the UN. These are just a few of the leaders out of the dozens of government agencies who don't answer to a secretary. Agencies like NASA, the CIA, and the U.S. Postal Service. Most of these agency leaders won't be members of the cabinet, but they do maintain a direct line to the President. Since the President and the Vice President are the only elected members of the executive branch, and none of the President's appointed government leaders are elected by the public, the Constitution has built in a check on the executive branch through the elected officials of the legislative branch. Most of those important but unelected offices appointed by the President must also be confirmed by a vote in the Senate. All told, the President must appoint around 4,000 government positions, but 1,200 of those presidential appointments are subject to Senate approval. But the most punitive check the legislative branch has on the President, to be employed in cases of presidential corruption, treason, or other detrimental acts to the country, is Congress's ability to impeach and then ultimately to remove the President from office. The judicial branch also has its own check on the executive branch, since presidential administrations can file lawsuits as well as be sued. Federal courts can enforce injunctions or declare the outright unconstitutionality of executive actions and policies. But the executive balances the power of the judicial branch, since federal judges, like so many high-ranking officials, are not elected by the public, but are instead appointed by the President. And judicial appointments made by the President are, once again, also subject to approval by the Senate. But while appointments made to the executive branch are temporary, appointments to the judicial branch are for life. Presidents themselves only serve a term lasting 4 years before they face re-election, and no one is permitted to be elected president for more than 2 terms. Nevertheless, leaving even a temporary vacancy in the office of the president is simply not an option, so the Constitution requires a vice president to be elected alongside the president. Technically speaking, the vice president's sole executive responsibility is to assume the office of the president if the sitting president is incapacitated or dies. That said, the role of vice presidents throughout history has ranged from utter irrelevance to trusted advisor to the president. We now come to the complex issue of how the president and vice president are actually elected, since they are not directly put into office by the citizens of the United States, but are instead elected via an unusual institution known as the Electoral College. But that will have to be explained in another video. To sum up, the executive branch is the part of government most residents interact with. The chief executive of the United States, the president, is also the head of state, the commander-in-chief of the military, and the nation's chief diplomat, in addition to leading a complex hierarchy of government agencies. The president must nevertheless have their executive nominations confirmed by the Senate. Congress is also empowered to impeach and remove the president for abuse of office. The president's powers are also limited in part via the judicial branch's check for constitutionality, even as the president is empowered to appoint judges. The next video will be the final in this series introducing the branches of U.S. government, where we'll focus on the judicial branch. We'll see you next time.